Well, howdy also to our friends following along at home. Good to be back with you again. Okay. Before we start, I wonder, would someone be willing to open us in prayer for our time together? All right, Brother Lee is going to pray for us.
Lord, you never told us it would be easy. Help us to understand what it is to continue to exercise and to prepare. Thank you for the teaching that is here. Help us to pay attention. Holy Spirit, we thank you that you are here to help us to learn and to pay attention to the words and to help us to understand it. And we love you, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Lee. Okay, well, good to be back with you again. We are here still journeying through the Hebrew wisdom literature. We've been mainly in Proverbs, but dealing a little bit in the book of Ecclesiastes too. And we're going to be in Ecclesiastes for part of our time this morning. Pastor Ed is with you for the discipleship hour next week. But for this week, we've talked a lot already in this course about speech, about our words. We've talked a little bit about how words can be really painful, how they can do a lot of damage, right? How they can damage us even in ways that physical injuries can't. And Ed talked us through a lot of that material. We're going to return to the theme of speech this morning, but we're going to be thinking about it a little bit differently. We've talked a little bit about how our words can wound others when they're not carefully chosen. And we're going to come back to another element of wisdom in speech, because this is a theme that Solomon and the biblical wisdom tradition comes back to again and again. And that makes sense that the wisdom literature deals with speech perhaps more than any other topic, because unless you're a total hermit, you have to speak every day, right? We all say tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of words every day. I did read a story recently about an actual hermit. Did anybody read about this guy? This guy who lived in the woods of, I think it was Connecticut, for 30 years without talking to another person. And he decided to come in from the cold because he was having some health problems. But he said he had not spoken to another human in 30 years. So that's unlikely to be you, unlikely to be us. So we need to think hard about our words. And we're going to return to another element of wise speech, which I'm calling economy of speech. Economy of speech. There's a reason we're going to use that language. But so to start, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verse 11. And I'm going to give a couple translations here. They're not my translations. I'm going to give you the ESV, and then I'm going to give you Eugene Peterson's translation from the Message. I don't know if you all like to read the Message. I've come to really like it. It makes the text come alive in a way that when you're used to reading one translation over and over, it's really helpful. So I'm going to read the ESV first, and then I'm going to read the Message. And we're going to see that actually a lot of the meaning of this verse depends on how it is translated from the Hebrew. As I said, it's not my translation. I'm no Hebrew expert. I'm relying on the work of others. But there's some different nuances in the image that come out with the different translations. So let me read them both for us. I'll read them through twice in each translation. Here's the ESV, Ecclesiastes 6, verse 11. The more the words, the more the vanity. And what is the advantage to man? I'll read that again. The more the words, the more the vanity. And what is the advantage to man? All right, here's the Message. The more words that are spoken, the more smoke there is in the air. And who is any better off? Let me read that again. The more words that are spoken, the more smoke there is in the air. And who is any better off? Okay, you might notice those translations are actually quite different. Right? They're not, but they're related in some important ways, which hopefully we can tease out. So let's start with the ESV. What does Solomon mean, do you think, when he says, the more the words, the more the vanity? That's a word we don't use often, vanity. Okay, right. So there may be, Joanne says there may be an element of using a lot of words to make yourself seem smart. And we do use vanity that way in English to talk about someone being vain. Good. What else is going on here?
Maybe referring to the smoke.
Okay, good. So Jean says, does this word relate to the smoke?
Many words and kind of confusing.
Yeah, so there's something to this image where you use a lot of words and they tend to dissipate maybe a little bit. It is related. We're going to come back to it. What else?
It says the more the words, the less the meaning.
Yeah, that's a good translation.
And how does that profit anyone?
Yeah, so Elise just provided another translation. Is that, what is that, NIV?
Yes.
Okay, so the NIV says the more the words, the less the meaning. And what does that profit anybody? Right, so we've tend to think of vanity as pridefulness, as in the word vainglorious, or like, it's not Janis Joplin, who is it? You're so vain. Carly Simon, you're so vain. I bet you thought this song was about you, right? So we tend to think of vanity as vaingloriousness, and it does mean that. But in Hebrew, this translates the Hebrew word hevel, Hevel, hevel. The word hevel, well, it means a bunch of things. One of the things it means is emptiness, right? So the more the words, the more the emptiness. We also use vain in this way in English, right? I tried in vain to move that box, or I tried in vain to convince him to do such and such. It means I tried without effect. My efforts came back empty. So part of what's going on in this image is that the more the words there are, the emptier the meaning. We're going to try to unravel what Solomon says by this. We talked when we introduced the book of Proverbs that Solomon often speaks in riddles. He's doing that here in Ecclesiastes too. Ecclesiastes is a hard book to read, partially because you don't know what is Solomon's own position, or whether he's saying, oh, I've heard it said, and he's talking about someone else's position. It's very hard to unravel it. He's speaking in riddles. It can be very cryptic. But one of the rewards of these cryptic proverbs is that when we put in the work to unravel them, there's a richness of meaning that doesn't come through as if Solomon were to say, there's something less powerful than if Solomon were to say, hey, don't talk a lot. Because that's true, but the riddle unlocks some richness here. So I have a riddle for you that's related to this proverb. What do words and dollar bills have in common? They're cheap. They're cheap now. Yeah, that's good. Any other thoughts? They're cheap. That's close. They both have some value. Really good. We're on to it. They are plentiful. Yeah. They represent something else. Okay, really good, right? So we're closing in on it. They represent something else. They're plentiful. They have some value. They're cheap. Here's the payoff. I'm sure there's many others. The thing that dollar bills and words have in common is this: the more of them there are in circulation, the less they are worth. The more of them there are in circulation, the less they are worth. So we may think of hevel as vanity, but let me suggest to you that Solomon wants to think of it as inflation, inflated speech, in the economic sense, which devalues our words. We have a phrase for this: talk is cheap. Right? We all probably know people whose words are not worth very much, not necessarily because they're bad people, but because they say so many darn words, right? Here's the thing. There's a book that came out by a philosopher of language in the, what's his name? Just blanked on his name. By Mr. Scholar, who teaches at Mr. Ivy League school. Not Chomsky, but someone like him. Yeah, he's a linguist, philosopher of language. He wrote a book called Metaphors We Live By. And it's a really interesting book. I really valued reading it because he said that metaphors are not just figures of speech that we use, they actually structure the way we think about reality. And he pointed out that we use financial metaphors to talk about our speech all the time. Can you think of any? We've already named one, talk is cheap. There's a bunch others. Can you think of any? They're so ingrained we can't even see them. Penny for your thoughts. That's good. Right? What else? Ooh, he's got a silver tongue. I hadn't thought of either of those two. You guys are really showing me up here. I'll add it to the list. Okay, penny for your thoughts. He's got a silver tongue. What else? There's a ton of them. Yeah, his word is as good as gold. Put your money where your mouth is. Here's my 2 cents. There's I don't know that one. Cash on the barrelhead. Is that one? Okay, great. Yeah, we're scratching the surface. There's a bunch more. Any others? Talk is cheap. What about this? I don't value his opinion. That's financial language. His words aren't worth much. Financial language. I don't have any currency with her. Financial language. He has a lot of capital that he's built up with those folks. Right? Financial language. You can take what she says to the bank. Even you can't trust what he says. That's a financial word. Okay? So, there's something here about thinking of our words as currency. Right? The more we use, the less it's worth. Right? So, the Hebrew hevel, we've just translated as vapor or mist. The word means vapor, mist. Yeah, those are kind of the two main translations. It's been translated vanity here in the ESV, but the word literally means mist, vapor, which means that it's unsubstantial, it's intangible, it's not solid. You can't depend on it. Randy made the point that a dollar bill represents something else, or at least it used to. It doesn't represent anything now. The Federal Reserve can literally create billions of them by hitting a button on a computer. That's how they create wealth. Well, back in the day when we were on the gold standard, every dollar was thought to be backed by gold, something hard, tangible. And our speech, if it's not to be cheap, should actually be backed by something tangible, right? This is part of what Solomon's trying to get us at. So the takeaway here is, how do we make our words more valuable? We use fewer of them, right? We create scarcity in economic language. We don't flood the market with our words. It's not a coincidence, I don't think, that the godliest people you know, the people whose advice you can take the most seriously, the people who command the most respect, are typically quiet and reserved. Some people are like this by nature. This is their disposition. For many of us, this is something we have to cultivate. Right? It's a discipline we actually have to learn to not speak. And it's hard. I've been reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, Life Together. If you've never read that book, I highly recommend it. And in that book, he talks about, he calls it the ministry of holding one's tongue, he calls it. And to be in community with anyone, you have to learn the ministry of holding your tongue. And he says we often excuse ourselves by saying, well, what I said was true, right? He says, just because something is true doesn't mean you need to say it. That's one of Bonhoeffer's big takeaways, right? And those of you who are teachers in the room or remember your teachers, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all, right? Often unnice things are true. Bonhoeffer says, doesn't mean you have to say it, right? So use fewer of them. So that's one element of this proverb. Let's think about it together in the Message translation. I'll read it again. The more words that are spoken, the more smoke is in the air. And then how is anyone any better off? More words are spoken, more smoke is in the air. Now, how do we account for this? This seems to be a really radically different translation than the ESV gives us. Well, here's a hint. The word hevel, vapor, mist, vanity, futility, literally in Hebrew, it's the word for smoke. Right? And not with any special spiritual meaning. It's just literally the word for smoke. So if you're around a campfire, That's Hevel. See a building that's on fire, that's Hevel, right? Smoke. With that knowledge in mind, there's another layer of meaning to this proverb, I think. So part of it is inflation. We've talked about that. We use too many words. The meaning is devalued. What's another layer of meaning? What do you think Solomon is doing with this smoke metaphor? Okay, good. So Joanne says you can't see through it. Say a bit more what you mean there. Oh, good. All right. So she talks about Occam's razor, which is a philosophical principle that says that the simplest explanation is likely to be the truest explanation. So if we find that we're having to use lots and lots of words to describe something, probably we don't know what we're talking about, right? What else? What else is this smoke metaphor doing? Oh, it confuses. Good. Say more about that. Yeah, good. So right, it creates confusion. You talk to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, lots and lots of words. Suddenly you're both in a big cloud of smoke. No one can see where, right? So
Or the other metaphor about the guy's blowing smoke,
guys blowing smoke.
and he's really maybe trying to deceive.
Yeah. Oh, man. That's really good. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, Stan. Oh, that's good. Like smoke and mirrors. All right, so Stan says it diverts your attention from the truth. And then Nate says the metaphor we use here is smoke and mirrors. Ninjas who always use smoke bombs, right, to escape.
Smoke obscures things, and people that are overly verbal oftentimes obscure the simplicity of the truth of the matter. And if you hear like a criticism of salesmen and so on, oftentimes they're fast talkers. They obscure the reality or the simplicity of the thing by talking, over talking, and obscuring
Yeah.
what's really going on, getting you to sign up for something you had no idea.
Yeah.
You were getting involved with.
Yeah, that's right. So Pastor Ed here says here that smoke obscures things. It obscures the truth. And salesmen often talk fast, use a lot of words. And before you know it, you've signed up for like cable at $300 a month and you don't know what happened until you get your bill. Or a timeshare, yeah. Yeah, Lee.
You talked about that this morning with the super apostles,
Yeah.
with all the words and the way they could twist things around and to make it sound how they wanted it to sound, whether it was truthful or not.
Yeah, good. So Lee talks about the super apostles that we meet in 2 Corinthians. Smooth talkers, really good at talking. But in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and then also in the New, simplicity of speech is an index of godliness, not the ability to speak really articulately, right? So yeah, we're all hitting it, right? Smoke makes things hazy when truthful speech brings clarity. That's part of what Solomon's trying to get us at here. So what are some examples of this, where too many words makes things hazy rather than bringing clarity? There's a lot. We've already talked about a few, right? Salesmen, smoke and mirrors. What? Other examples?
So just think of contracts. They're so close, you have no idea what you're really reading. Whereas many, many years ago, and I realize times have changed dramatically, but like when I was growing up, things were really simple.
Yeah.
If you wanted to buy a car, you write on a piece of paper, I'll sell Ryan a car for $500.
A bill of sale. Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah.
And people literally believed that a handshake was enough. That was really true.
Yeah.
And now you need like 800 pages of dialogue to make sure you keep your word.
That's right. So Ed talks about how contracts used to be very simple, right? And now there's pages and pages and pages of legal speak on a contract. And as all of you will know, I think I used to work at a law firm for a long time. And my boss at the law firm one time said to me, there is a lawsuit behind every single clause in that contract. So as our culture has grown more and more litigious, the reason that when you sign up for a cell phone, it's 10 pages long, is because there's been a lawsuit about it, right? But there's lots of smoke in a contract. You read the words but have no idea what they mean, right? And you only find out that the small print has obligated you to like they get your firstborn in the event that you miss a payment or something, right? Yeah, Joanne.
If you know what they mean or can figure out what they mean, there's always that, because there's so many of them, there's always a chance that somebody will be able to find a loophole
Yeah,
to get you.
something you missed. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, they overwhelm you.
Have less words, there are less loopholes.
Yeah, less words, less loopholes. That's right. Yeah, and so, I mean, you drive past these payday loan shops, interest-free loan with a tiny asterisk, and then pages and pages that mean actually your interest rate is 41%, right? Yeah, good. What else?
Is it like all the warning labels that you get now? Because someone
Yeah,
put a cup of
McDonald's coffee.
hot coffee between their legs and drove off and couldn't understand why they got burned.
Yeah, that's right. All these warning labels, Lee says, right? So McDonald's has to say, don't dump this in your lap. Because you can come back and there's a lawsuit, right? All right, other examples where speech obscures but instead of brings clarity, makes more smoke in the air.
Heard about something that was brought in the day after inauguration was a bill that had 20,000 pages.
Yeah, that's
Nobody read, you know.
Yeah, you got senators who have bills that are 20,000 pages and they have to vote on them. They get like an hour to read them. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, people who speak gibberish a lot and tire you out. That's good. What about gossip? Talk about smoke in the air. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I heard this. Right? Or I wasn't there, but I heard this. Right? Smoke. Haze in the air, right? Smoke also stings your eyes, right? Brings the opposite of clarity. What about communication within an organization or a family, right? Confusing directives about what is expected, right? You ever worked in a job where you're not sure what you're supposed to be doing and then you get in trouble, right? Direct communication. What about dancing around an issue instead of speaking clearly and forthrightly? Yeah, we got lots of examples in our culture. Sometimes we might be trying to protect someone's feelings, or we might be trying to shield them from something unpleasant, so we don't actually tell the whole truth, and that does more harm than good, right? What about inadvertently creating innuendo when we don't speak directly? Right? Not trying to mislead anyone, but we're not forthright in our speech, so it creates haze when there's not. How about when we don't say what we mean? There's lots of reasons for this, why we may not say what we mean. We don't want to damage a relationship. We don't want to offend someone. We don't want to implicate ourselves. We don't want people to know what we're really thinking. So we create haze, smoke in the air. Read my words, I'll never raise taxes, he had promised. But that broke his earlier campaign promise. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So he talks about how the Bush 1 said, I'm going to have to raise taxes. And as someone hears that, they're out. But if he says, oh, we need to invest in infrastructure and education in our children's future, that also means I'm going to raise taxes. But he just didn't say it, right? Oh. Oh, wow. That's really good. So Joanne says that our word duped comes from Old English, which means to duplicate, which makes a lot of sense, right? And we talk about double speak, or he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, right? Those metaphors we live by. Man, that's really good. And that's a... Yeah. Right, exactly. Right. So that's actually a good segue into our next proverb. But before we get there, I just want to say, do you notice when you read the Gospels how plainly Jesus speaks? Except for in the Gospel of John. And that's when he's talking to his disciples. He's giving long, kind of intimate teachings. But when he's in public, Jesus is very frank with his speech. He does not waste words. And he tells us in the Sermon on the Mount, what does he say? Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Why? Anything more than this, he says, comes from the evil one. Right? Jesus knew his Hebrew Bible. Right? It's part of what's going on. All right, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about being duped. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19. It's so good. Words being duplicated. I had not thought about that. Double talk. So listen to what Solomon says here in Proverbs 10:19. When words are many, and we could translate that multiplied, duplicated. When words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. Eugene Peterson translates this very starkly. The more the words, the more the sin. Yeah, go ahead.
Going back a few years, in our young married class, we had a couples meeting about words, and one of the women talk more than guys, so they're sinners, they're bigger sinners.
So Dave says he was teaching a young marrieds class where one of the men said, see, the women talk more than men, so they must sin more. He must have missed the second half. Yeah. Whoever restrains his lips is prudent. So we know from Solomon in Ecclesiastes 6 that there are at least two dangers when we talk too much. We diminish the value of our words through inflation, or we make things hazier by blowing smoke, by failing to speak clearly, concisely, and directly. But in this proverb here, Solomon is warning of a different but related danger to talking too much. What is it? What's the danger here? Yeah. Yeah. So Nathan makes the point that we've all had this experience, I'm sure, that we've been in conversations where the points have been made, but then we keep talking, and he says sometimes, in a context like that, a conversation tends to get away from us, and we walk away with regret having said something we shouldn't have said, without ever having intended to say that, right? So the more the words, the more the sin. Here's the question, though. Let's think about this as a class. Why does sin tend to multiply when our words do? Why is this? I think there's a bunch of reasons once we start. Okay, good. So sins can betray something that's going on inside of us that we weren't planning on sharing. We talk too much, comes out. Andy, are you going to chime in there? Yeah, the scripture's constantly warning us of the tongue, right? Particularly in the book of James. Very powerful. Good. Why else? Why else do sins multiply when our words do? Yeah, Dave. Okay, good. So he quotes Jesus here, Dave does. Out of the abundance of the heart, or the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. That's a really suggestive image. And I don't fully understand what Jesus is talking about. I think there's a lot of depth there, but part of it must be that we have things that are not ready to come to light yet, should stay inside. And he says overflow. Once you start the spigot, you can't slow down the flow, right? Good. What else? Yeah, Randy. Yeah, the Lucy, you got some splaining to do principle, right? When we get caught, we talk a lot, right? See what happened, and then you spout a bunch of nonsense, right? And hope that they forget that they caught you. There's a bunch, right? Number one, there's a principle of sheer probability. The more words there are, the greater the likelihood that some of them will be ill-chosen, right? If we're not careful. The danger of mindlessness. A couple of us have talked about this already. When we begin talking without a purpose, when we're not clear about what we're intending to accomplish with our speech, we may lose track of what we're saying, say something we don't mean, say something wrongly. We have another figure of speech for this. He or she is careful with their words, right? As opposed to being careless, right? You ever talk to a really thoughtful person? They sometimes take a while to respond. They think for a few seconds before they say something, right? They're careful with their words. Once we start talking, we've already talked about this, we're likelier to say something that should have been unsaid. How about this? The more you talk, the less you're listening, right? It's a characteristic of a bad listener, always talking, or always listening in view of the next thing that you're going to say, right? Like, I can't wait till this person stops talking, so then I can start again, right? We've all had that experience. Or we give the impression when we talk too much, even if we don't mean to give this impression, even if it's unintentional, that we're much more interested in ourselves than we are in other people. Right? We have another expression for this. They like hearing themselves talk. They like the sound of their own voice. Right? Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Yeah, you're right. So Joanne makes the point, like just like when we tell jokes and then explain the punchline, that takes away the power of the joke. Jesus doesn't over-explain. He often just leaves it out there, says what he means, and yeah, and then you can do with it what you will, right? Okay, well, here's a question. What are some concrete situations where we have a tendency to talk too much? Yeah.
When we think we have a different opinion from someone else.
Okay, when we are talking to someone whose opinion we regard as wrong or different, and we need to set them straight, or we need to make sure our own opinions are heard, we have a tendency to talk too much. Really good. What else? Yeah. Okay, that's really good. When you're really interested in something, you tend to think that everybody else is, and it's almost never the case. Right? No one wants to hear about your fantasy football team. Right? That's a good rule of thumb. You're interested, no one else is interested. That's a really good one. Obviously, you know, that applies more when we're talking about non-kind of moral issues, but no one wants to see your old family vacation videos, right? That's a running joke. Want to come over and watch pictures from our trip? I mean, if I have to maintain this relationship, but I don't want to, right? That's good, Nate. What else? Okay, yeah, right? Kind of following on Lee's point. When we see something we feel like it's our responsibility to correct, we might talk too much. What else? Yep. Never. Yeah. Yep. We talked, so Ed makes the point that Jesus comes from an incredible place of security. And often we speak too much when we're insecure or when we want to justify what we're doing. Jesus never does this. He quoted 1 Peter there. He entrusts himself to the one who judges justly. He says what he means. Doesn't have to apologize for it. Doesn't have to go on long explanations. And he does sometimes. If people ask him what the parable means, the disciples, he'll tell them. but he doesn't have to justify himself all the time. We often speak too much when we're insecure. For me, I have a tendency to do this when I don't want to offend someone. So like say, I'm at my limit on commitments I can take pretty much at this season of my life. I've got a child at home. I've got jobs that I need to take seriously. And if I have, I fairly often have seminary students ask me to get together, ask me to mentor them. Number one, I used to always say yes. I'm getting better at that. But then I used to say no, but give long explanations because I feel bad. And now I'm trying to learn to just say, no, I appreciate it, but I'm just not able to. And just say that. You don't have to tell someone why you won't be at something. You don't have to tell someone why you're not interested in doing something. You can just speak plainly. I appreciate the invitation. I'm not going to be able to do it. Full stop. Any further than that, we create smoke. Oh, I can't. My sister's in town, and we're going to go to dinner. And then they see on your Facebook that your sister's not in town, and you are not having dinner. And then you're like, oh, we decided not to at the last minute. Her flight got canceled. Is everything okay? Yeah, she had an emergency. It's fine now. And then there was no emergency. You could have just said, no, sorry, I can't make it. Right? Yeah, good. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Randy's joking, but he's not. Attorneys say, you can stay silent, you know. At the law firm, when we were preparing people for trial, they were going to be on the stand. Most of our advice was stop talking. And actually, we had a signal that if the paralegal or the attorney was biting on their pen during testimony, that meant stop saying things. You're not helping yourself. Good. So when we feel insecure, I think that's a big one. I think another situation is, ironically, we talk too much when we don't know what to say. Ever tried to talk to someone who's experienced tremendous grief? It's very hard for us to talk to people who are grieving because we feel like we should say something, right? We don't have to say anything, right? Or in my line of work at the seminary or here at the church, I might feel like I have to have something spiritual to say in any kind of given situation. I don't have to. It's usually better if I don't, right? Better for everyone. We tend to talk too much when we have a secret, when we have information about something. And I don't want to say too much, and then we say too much, right? Yeah, go ahead, Andy. Oh, good. Yeah, we talk too much when we're in a position of authority. Parenting or having people under you at work or something like this. That's really good. There's lots. When we try to demonstrate how much we know about something, right? When we need to show our expertise. We have a word for this, pontificating. You know this word? What does it mean to pontificate? You know this word? To go on and on and on. Yep. Comes from the Latin word for priest. Says a lot of what we think of pastors. Goes on and on and on. When we pontificate, we're blathering on and on and on about what we know. Right? We call it getting on a soapbox. Right? A wise person doesn't need to tell you what they know. They'll tell you if you ask. Right? There was a 19th century British aristocrat by the name of Lord Chesterfield. Does anybody know that name, Lord Chesterfield? Chesterfield wrote a book of proverbs, maxims. And Chesterfield said, wear your learning like a pocket watch. It's a little riddle. What he means is, wear your learning, the things that you know, like a pocket watch. What does that image mean? Yep, pull it out at the right time. If someone asks you what time it is, pull out your pocket watch and tell them. But don't go around yelling, it's 11:11 when nobody asked. Right? Think about how absurd that is. He says, and our wisdom is like that. A wise person will tell you if you ask. Right? But they don't need you to know how smart they are. That's often how we speak too much.
Like the watch, it's hidden.
Yeah.
Purposely hidden to start with.
Yeah, the pocket watch is in your pocket. Right? It's a tool, not a decoration. Yep. We talk too much when we're nervous, when we're anxious, when we're scared, when we're angry. There's lots of examples. So that brings us to our time. So I just want to see if we can tie this together with just a few applications. How can we practice economy of speech? And so, like last week, we're just going to take some stock. So I'm just going to ask some questions. We can just think about it this week. Where in your life, in your home life maybe, your relationship to your spouse, relationship to your kids, relationship to your siblings, your parents, maybe it's work, maybe it's in your friendships, where are your words losing value because they're inflated? Right? There's too many of them. Where do we need to cut back the supply, create some scarcity? I'm not saying to go home and give your spouse the silent treatment and just say, I'm practicing economy of speech. That's not the idea. But where can we talk less? Where's one concrete area? Think about that this week. Where have I been guilty of making smoke in the air rather than bringing clarity with my speech? Where do I need to be a little more direct, a little more forthright? Doesn't mean doesn't mean rude, doesn't mean say what you're thinking all the time, but it does mean where can we be a bit more direct? Where can we bring some clarity rather than smoke? And then third, think of some situations where you have a tendency to multiply your words. This takes some self-awareness. We need to ask ourselves, where do I have a tendency to talk too much? Is it when I'm really fired up about something I'm passionate about but no one else is? Is it when I feel like I'm not being heard, I'm feeling insecure? Is it when I have to demonstrate how much I know? Right? Think about that this week. Where do I tend to talk too much? And where can I scale back? Where can I restrain my lips? Create some more value through scarcity of words. So that's it for this morning. We're at time, so I'll let you go. Could we get a closing prayer from someone out there? Extra heaven points if you do it. All right, thanks, Nathan.
Lord, thank you so much that we can come together and have honor, trust, and honor. Thank you that we can worship you today.
Amen. Thank you, Nathan. Thanks, everyone. Great to be with you. We'll see you next week. Have a great week.